So my name's Adam Chirinas. I'll tell you a little bit about my background in a minute, particularly as it relates to partnerships. But I'm a serial entrepreneur. Some of my businesses have even been vaguely successful, and I've also worked for big corporations as well. So I've been involved in partnerships on both sides of the table. And I've also helped clients set up partnerships as well. And the reason they're so important is that, particularly for startups, is they can be a game changer. They can be something that can turbocharge your business and fundamentally change your destiny. And so what I hope you will learn in this session, a few things. First of all, the benefits of partnership. That some are less obvious than others, so maybe you'll get some new ideas from that. Types of partnerships to consider. Just to be clear, if you Google business partnerships, you're going to get a whole thing about LLCs and partners. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is relationships between companies. And it's a very general term, and I'm going to go into quite a lot of detail about the different types of partnerships. I'm also going to touch on the challenges in making them successful, because frankly, more partnerships fail than succeed, and some of them can fail quite spectacularly. And so there's a lot that you need to think about if you go into it. And so I'll share with you some thoughts on sort of best practice. So a little bit about me. I've got a kind of a career in three acts. The first act was in the strategic marketing. I worked for a big marketing agency called Ogilvy and Mather, working with companies like IBM and Maxwell House. And then I moved into the whole area of digital marketing, where I worked for several companies, but working on some amazing brands like Dell and Sirius Satellite Radio and American Express, and Diageo, which is one of the top alcohol brands and the businesses in the world. And for both of those companies, I was actually working on partnership deals. So I've had some experience from a consulting standpoint. Most recently, and I'm talking about the last 10 years, I became a digital health entrepreneur, and I'll tell a little bit more about kind of that journey and why partnerships are important. But I had the pleasure of working with some fantastic healthcare organizations. So major healthcare systems like Hackensack Meridian Health, one of the biggest healthcare systems in the Northeast, UNC Healthcare, and then RWJ Barnabas. And this was, these are three of many healthcare systems that I work with my technology company. My new company is called healthlaunchpad. And basically what we do is it's the convergence of marketing and health technology. And so what my goal is with healthlaunchpad is to improve the quality of marketing in the whole area of health technology, because it's an area, it's a market that is a little bit behind the times in many regards. And I'm doing it in three ways. I've created a group called Connect, which is a networking group for healthcare sales and marketing people. I'm helping with education, so creating content like this to help educate professionals in health technology. And then last but not least is grow. So I provide consulting services to help companies get into the market, but also things like their account-based marketing strategy. So let me tell you a bit about my entrepreneurial journey, and as a startup, why partnerships were so important. So up till about 2001, I was gainfully employed working for big corporations. And then in 2001, with the dot-com crash, I was unemployed, which created a great opportunity to start something up. And I started a couple of companies. Market Developer, which was a CRM software platform, which was an unmitigated failure. And then Marketing Improvement, which was a consulting company, which I worked with for about a year and then moved on, and it carried on. I then went back into gainful employment for the best part of 10 years, working for a couple of companies in the marketing area. And then in 2012, I went back into my second phase of my entrepreneurial life. I started with a consulting company, a communications consulting company called Navio Health. And about 6 months into that journey, my partner, a physician, and I had an idea for a mobile applications, a communications application for physicians, which we called Practice Unite. And that took off. Physicians loved it. Nurses loved it. Their healthcare systems really loved it. And we grew that company over the next few years really, really fast. We raised a little bit of money. We then absorbed another company and rebranded the company Unify Health. Whole notion of unify, bringing together technology and people to improve communications. And then in 2019, we sold that company to Harris Healthcare, which is a major health technology company. And then I exited the company and then started Health Launchpad. But throughout that second entrepreneurial chapter of my life, partnerships were absolutely critical. And we had one partnership in particular with a hardware and software reseller called Futura Mobility, which was absolutely critical. And I don't think we would have been remotely successful had it not been for this partner. So the co-founder and I were at a trade show in New Jersey, and we went along to Futura Mobility. They had a little event. We went along and gate crashed that event, and we met the management team. And once they heard what we did and they heard about our application, they said they thought that their boss, the CEO of the company, would be really interested in it. And so we had a meeting with him, and he fell in love with what we were doing. And they became our reseller. They introduced us to healthcare systems that we couldn't have got near. And eventually they accounted for about 40% of our revenue. They helped us create, reach, as I said, generate tons of leads. They closed deals for us. It gave us credibility. It raised our profile and our reputation. They also enabled us to sort of extend our marketing dollars. Like, we had very little in the way of marketing budget, but through our partnership with them, we were able to go to trade shows all over the country that we wouldn't have got to otherwise. They also had the support arm. So they did some of our service and support. And through their relationships that they had in the healthcare industry, they were giving us ideas on product opportunities and things that we needed to do to improve the product. They were great advocates, but also they became investors. So that was a partnership which started as the possibility of becoming a reseller, and eventually changed the way that our company operated. And in fact, the CEO of the company eventually became our chairman and is a great friend of mine to this day. So there are a number of different benefits of partnering. First of all, it allows you to stay focused. And when you're a startup, you've got to cover a lot of ground with a very small team, and staying focused on a few things is incredibly important. So being able to sort of have a partner offload some of those tasks and those activities is incredibly valuable. By the way, that's not just important for startups. I've worked with many big corporations on sort of advising them on partnerships. And in many regards, one of the reasons they partnered is that they can stay good at what they do. And rather than try and build a capability, they'll form a partnership with somebody else to provide that, fill that gap. As you saw with my own example with Futura, it helped us get to customers that we wouldn't otherwise have reached. And it helped us to scale our revenue. So I didn't need to go out and hire 25 salespeople because they had a whole bunch of salespeople. It helped us lower our costs because they actually took on some of our support costs. And although this wasn't particularly relevant to us, and you'll see this in some of the examples, you can also use it as a way to scale your supply chain. All of this gives you a competitive advantage. And I would say that the companies in our space, that did the best were the ones that had the best partnerships. Some of the other benefits of partnering, and I'll get into some examples of this, is you can provide new customer experiences. So maybe by putting yourself together, putting your solution together with somebody else's solution, you can provide some new products and new experiences for your customers that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. The other benefits around risk mitigation and cost reduction, and last but not least, it creates innovation, because really great partnership means that you've got other people contributing ideas to what you do. And we found that in our partnership with Futura, that we had it generated ideas for enhancements to the product that wouldn't otherwise have happened. So let me kind of categorize this at a high level. There's a lot of different ways of categorizing partnerships, but I kind of think they fall into three buckets. There are business partnerships, which are all about money. So it's either you and your partner are either increasing your revenues or lowering your costs, or both. Or there are technology partners where the sum of the parts is great. The whole combination of your two technologies is greater than the sum of your parts. So it helps you improve your product offering or closes a technology gap, and will do the same for your partner as well. Strategic partnerships, I think, is what happens over time. So typically a business partnership or a technology partnership, or both together, will evolve into more of a strategic partnership. And in some cases, that strategic partnership may actually result in a change in corporate structure, like a joint venture, or may even involve an exchange of equity in your company, or maybe even ownership. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail later on, as you sort of see the ways that you can structure partnerships. So let me give you some examples of. We'll start off with business partnerships, and this is particularly in the area of sales and marketing. So HubSpot is one of the leaders in marketing automation software, and they have three types of partners, and this has been absolutely critical to the success of this company, which is, I think, it's a unicorn. It's valued well over $1 billion. They have marketing agency partners who use their software to create websites and content marketing programs for their customers. They have sales partners that work on sort of things like CRM and sales process improvement. And then they have integration partners that integrate the HubSpot product with other products. So for example, Salesforce would be an example of that. And it's a very simple program. You get a 20% commission, 20% of the HubSpot revenue for the first year of a deal. And then with that, you get an awful lot of support and tools and referrals as well. And they have this fantastic program which involves, you as a partner, you become trained in how to use HubSpot. And based on the amount of training that you get and the feedback that customers provide about you, you then can become, I think they call them platinum partners. So it's a really interesting structured program that has been critical to their success, but equally critical to the success of their partners. Completely different type of sales and marketing partnership here is in the pharmaceutical space. So it's a relationship between Abbott and Zydus Cadila. And what they do is, I don't even frankly know what the drug is, but they have a relationship in India where Abbott India basically markets the drug by Zydus Cadila. So each company can focus on what it does best. Abbott, massive sales and marketing operation in India. Zydus Cadila has some type of medication that Abbott doesn't produce, and so that Zydus uses Abbott's sales channel to deliver their product, and then they have a partnership, a revenue partnership, so that both companies are making money. Here's another example of a partnership. This is a company called the Toyota IQ. So the Toyota IQ was marketed in the UK as Toyota IQ, and then rebranded it. This one's actually branded. Sorry, this is the Toyota IQ over here. So in the UK, it was marketed as Toyota IQ. This one over here, and then in the rest of Europe, it was branded as the Aston Martin Signet. So, and they did that partnership because they had conflict issues in each one of in those respective markets. But by essentially rebranding the same product differently, they solved a sales and marketing problem that both companies had. Now, this is an example of a supply chain partnership. So Lotus makes these fantastic small sports cars. Interesting thing is Toyota, that also makes some high performance cars, actually makes the engines for Lotus. So Lotus is a kind of a boutique little company that makes these fantastic little cars, but they don't really have the scale in terms of manufacturing that Toyota does. And so that enables Lotus to provide a sort of a really high quality engine that they're involved with the design in, but to do it at a much, much lower cost and at a much higher quality. It's like, more reliable engines. Another supply chain example. So Texas Instruments, a company many of you are familiar. They make the parts that go into so many different, hundreds and hundreds of different companies' products. And some of those are design partnerships. So, for example, they have a relationship with Apple, where the underlying technology in the Apple HomeKit is made by TI, and their relationship together is that a lot of what Apple does drives TI's design process, and Apple's benefiting from TI's supply chain in making chips. Another business partnership, outsourcing. So outsourcing is a multi-billion-dollar market. So a great example here is, and it's sort of an unusual example, is Bank of Ireland works with Accenture in outsourcing their e-learning. So the Bank of Ireland employees get all of their online training. All of their online training is provided by Accenture, although it's actually, to them, it looks like they're getting it from Bank of Ireland. But the whole learning management system, all of the content, all of the support is outsourced to Accenture. And there are hundreds and hundreds of examples of different outsourcing deals. I thought this was kind of a neat one. Let's move on and talk about technology partnerships. So research and development is one area of technology partnerships. And this I thought was a really nice one. So Coca-Cola and Heinz have a partnership to create more sustainable bottles. So although Coca-Cola is probably one of the biggest bottlers or one of the biggest consumers of bottles in the world, Heinz actually has some unique technology in making much more sustainable bottles. And so they partnered together to create a much more environmentally friendly product. In the area of healthcare, I thought this is I really like this partnership. So Kaiser Permanente is one of the largest providers of healthcare in the country. They essentially account for the vast majority of healthcare providers, and they're also the insurance company for millions of Californians and Oregonians and people in Washington State. They've partnered together with Best Buy, the retailer, and Great Call, a technology company, to create a product called Lively, which is a remote monitoring and emergency call product for older adults, so that your mother or your grandmother has a two-way communication device that helps them get help and actually can sort of monitor some of their health conditions. So I just think it's a really creative and an unusual deal between healthcare provider, retailer, and a small technology provider. So if you're a startup, you can play with the big boys if you've got something unique, which enables them both to, capture value in a different way. Another technology partnership in healthcare. So Induction Health is a small software company in the UK that makes these great patient applications. Cerner is an 800-pound gorilla in healthcare. They're hundreds of billions of dollars, and they make electronic health records. So they really great at making sort of big scalable products. They're not really good at making highly intuitive, consumer friendly customer experiences. So Cerner and Induction have partnered together in the UK to create a patient engagement solution, a way of the British Health Service to provide ways for their patients to interact with the healthcare providers. So it's a nice sort of like David and Goliath story. One you may be familiar with if you've ever taken an Uber and you're a Spotify user. You can create the soundtrack for your ride. So it's a really kind of cool new experience. So you can create your playlist, and when you get into the Uber, apparently it automatically starts playing your playlist. It's like a really nice, that's an example of an integration partnership. So I hope you're kind of getting a sense of there are so many different ways of creating partnerships that can, expand the possibilities. One of the most, I think one of the most brilliant ones is the relationship between Nike and Apple. I mean, two fantastic brands that work so well together. And in the early 2000s, they started partnering, Nike, really not a technology company. Apple, kind of a lifestyle company, but more of a technology company. So together they created the Nike Plus, which use Apple technology to do things like, measure if you're in your running shoes, how far you've run and sort of the pace at which you're running. And they've evolved that to a broader suite of products. And that's a relationship which has really, really endured. And I think from Apple's standpoint, it helped to inform a lot of what they've done with both the Apple iPhone and the Apple Watch to track your fitness. One of the things to think about, which I always think is sort of kind of key thing to think about, is why would a large company want to partner with a small company? And there are actually a lot of reasons why they do. And many of these sort of huge multinational companies have quite significant partnership and innovation groups that are looking for these kind of relationships. And they do it for a bunch of reasons. First of all, innovation. So, small, highly talented startups often have, bigger, better ideas than they might have in their own organization. So they bring in a fresh perspective. Expertise. So particularly in healthcare, where you might have some sort of, some very, advanced scientists that are working in a place like, like here at TSU, and have expertise that otherwise a large company can't access. Nimbleness is another reason. Is that by their own admission, big companies move slowly. That's it's the the oil tanker analogy is like they just takes forever to move. They like the fact that small companies can do things much quicker and much more agile. It also helps to mitigate risk. So if there's an area that a big company is interested in innovating in, they can actually mitigate the risk by essentially outsourcing that innovation to a small company. And then the last thing is incubation. So you might actually come up with an idea together, and it's actually often better for a large company to incubate that idea outside of their own environment. Some companies recognize that, kind of big, they just tend to kind of squash sort of little startup ideas too early, and they actually do better if they incubate them outside in a kind of a safe space. So let's talk about partnership structures, because there are a lot of different ways to do partnerships. And I actually involved my wife in helping me think this through. My wife is a corporate attorney who's worked on mergers and acquisitions and company formation, has worked on a lot of different deals. But what I want you to think about as you kind of think this big arrow is that as I show these different types of partnerships, you're going to see they become increasingly more strategic. So they could be technology partnerships, they could be business partnerships, they could be both, but there are lots of different ways of forming partnerships. So the most basic partnership is a handshake. Now, it's something which is not advisable for everybody, but there are actually plenty of businesses that got started where, I trust you, you trust me, we're going to put at risk our business relationship, and we're going to work together. And then eventually you kind of realize, well, you've got to codify that. And so one of the simplest partnership structures is a referral agreement. So in my new business and my old business, I have a simple referral agreement where if I refer an opportunity to one of my partners, I get a revenue share, and it's a mutual agreement. Really simple, sort of simple 2-page agreement, and it just codifies it. These are extremely common. A reseller agreement is kind of a referral agreement, sort of next level. And there are many different ways of structuring them. And it's typically what you'd have with a bigger corporation in a bigger reseller. And sometimes they're margin based. So that means that the reseller is buying your product for a fixed price, they're reselling it, and they're making money on the margin, as opposed to a share of revenue. There are also things called bundling agreements. So that's where you might have multiple products put together. Maybe some of them are your products are put together with other products. And it's sort of more kind of the things that you get in an integration. So the two of you put a product together and you agree on how that bundle is, how you're going to make money on that bundle. Next level, and maybe it's at the same level as those in terms of complexity, is licensing agreement. So if you've got some intellectual property, could be software, could be a creative thing, there are lots of different things in a brand or something like that. You agree with your partner that they can license it. So actually one of the most interesting pieces of work that I did was I worked with this company, Diageo. They make Guinness. They make Johnny Walker whiskey. I think they also they own Malibu and one of the big rum brands. I can't remember now. And they some of those brands are sort of like lifestyle brands. Like Guinness is strongly affiliated with sports like rugby in Europe. And so the Guinness sponsors that. And then there's a lot of merchandise that goes with it. So they have a partnership with a number of different apparel companies to license their brand so that the Guinness brand appears on sweatshirts and T-shirts and rugby shirts and things like that. Now you're getting into some more, now we're going to get into some more strategic partnership structures. So, typically, that when you've got a partnership, a significant technology partnership, let's say the one between Apple and Nike, you need to have a very sophisticated and detailed contract. I'm calling it an operating contract. Those types of agreement have many different names, but essentially it defines how you and the partner are going to work together. What's the expectations, how you're going to share costs, how you're going to share revenues, all of those detailed components. And that's kind of what you use to essentially as the sort of foundation for those types of partnership. Now I put the words in of no equity because, but relationship between Nike and Apple is probably not going to, they're not going to exchange ownership in each other's companies to operate together. But you might go to the next stage, which is actually have an operating agreement where, as a startup, you might actually give some equity in return for doing business. And in that kind of case, you're really getting into the area of joint ventures. So, joint ventures is a pretty vague term. And it's sort of, people, it's not actually a legal term. It's more of a business term. And there are lots of different types of joint ventures. So there are actually joint ventures where there's no equity exchange. It's just simply an operating agreement. And there are joint ventures where there is some exchange of equity. And in that case, what you're doing is you've actually got some type of formation agreement or an ownership contract. And you may be forming a new entity that you both have equity in. So it gets much more complicated. The last level is actually kind of like kind of a kicker on that other joint venture, which is, for startups, this may be a step towards getting acquired. So there are often partnership agreements with a bigger corporation where one of the things they have is an option to acquire you or first right of refusal. So that kind of gives you a sense of the spectrum from easy to really hard to do. So again, you can have partnerships on a handshake with somebody you trust. What you're putting at risk is your relationship. But as soon as you can, as soon as it makes sense, you want to codify that. And there are lots of different ways of doing it. Now, partnerships, I think, frankly, go wrong more often than they go right. They're hard to do well. We had a ton of different partnerships in my previous company, and most of them, I wouldn't say that many of them actually were, came to blows. I've only ever had one partner where we fired them, but most of the partnerships that we had, started with good intention, but never really got off the ground. The reason partnerships get into trouble for a lot of reasons. And I put out on LinkedIn the other day, and I asked people, it's like, well, why do you think partnerships fail? And the single biggest thing that everybody said was there's a lack of alignment. So, you go into a partnership with a clear understanding of the value you want to get out of it, and your partner has a clear understanding of the value they want to get out of it. And you better make sure that those two are well aligned, because things can get squirrely in a hurry. And, like any relationship, communication, lack of communication or poor communication can be can lead to the unraveling of a partnership in a hurry. The other issue as a startup founder, it became a big internal issue for me, is the loss of control. So I would have some of my colleagues, were a little paranoid about some of our partners, that were feeling that we were giving away too much control in terms of how the product was sold and how the relationships were managed. It's something that you have to be very aware of. It does become a sort of like an internal issue as to why things can unravel. The next issue is a lack of executive support. And so, if you're a startup, it's quite easy to get executive support because it's a small company. But if you've got a partnership with a bigger organization, you're probably dealing with a mid-level person. And so you better be very sure that they've got executive buy-in and that their bosses are as committed to the partnership as they are. Because, if the executive's agenda doesn't include you, that partnership may not go very far. And that's some of the reasons why some of the partnerships we had didn't really come to fruition, is that the people that we were dealing with didn't really have the buy-in of their bosses. Commercial and financial quarrels, squabbling over, rev share or cost share. Those are kind of irritants. I don't think deals fall apart that often over it. And if they do, it's because you haven't put the right agreement in place in the first place. Interpersonal issues, that can happen. You get two people on, particularly two executives who don't see eye to eye, and the deals can fall apart. Customer ownership is a big issue, and that's again goes back to that sense of loss of control. That you feel like, is it, particularly in a reseller agreement, is it my customer or is it their customer, or is it shared customer? And there's a lot of nuance there, and I think you've got to, I found that it works best when you're respectful of what's the old saying is you go home with the person who brought you to the dance. It's like you're respectful of the people who brought you into that customer, and you should always support them. But your partner needs to respect the value that you're bringing to the party as well. IP issues can be a problem if you don't define them really well in your agreement, and particularly when you're creating a product together. And so if you are doing an integration or a product partnership, you've got to spend a lot of time thinking that through, and think through the worst possible cases and where it gets messy, because that's where, when you write an agreement, what you're thinking about is not going in not so much how you go into the partnership, but it's more about two things. One is how you're going to run the partnership together, but almost more importantly, it's like if the partnership falls apart, how are you going to separate the two? And IP is critical on that. The last point is exclusivity. And that's quite a delicate issue, because quite often you may have a partner that really likes what you do, and they may ask for exclusivity. And so, you really don't want to give away exclusivity unless you absolutely have to, because you just don't really know what's down the road for you. So avoid it. But it can be an irritant for your partner that they want more exclusivity from you than you're prepared to give them. A lot of this sounds like, the sort of relationships you may have with your partner in love as well. Okay, success factors. So my advice to anybody, my advice to everybody with everything, but particularly when it comes to partnerships, is crawl, walk, run, particularly if you're a startup. I love starting with referrals. It's just a simple agreement to have in place. It's a sort of low friction. I've got, for example, in my own business, I've got a referral agreement. I send it out. I don't expect anybody to make any changes, and they can sign it, send it back or not. And if they don't sign it, send it back, they don't want to have a referral agreement. It's pretty simple. If that then evolves, I can then sort of evolve that. So I'm actually in conversations with a couple of companies where I think there's a more advanced relationship. And so that time we're going to probably have a more complex agreement in place. That's right. The other thing is that, I think if you kind of remember one thing today, it is the importance of having a mutual value proposition. And so the first question to ask when you meet a partner is not what's in it for you, but what's in it for them, because that's what's going to make the partnership successful. You know what's in it for you, and you don't have to think about that too hard, but you do have to think about what's in it for them, because that's going to define how hard they're going to work for this deal to be successful. So I can't stress that enough. What's in it for them goes first. Once you've got that value proposition down, you've got to codify this. You've got to find a way to define that, put that value proposition in writing, put the deal structure in writing, have clarity on the process. So when you go from having a referral agreement to having a reseller agreement, you may have reseller agreements with multiple organizations. And so there has to be a process for who owns the lead and how long they own that lead for. So there's a lead registration process is a way of handling that. There are all kinds of other processes that you need for supply chain partnerships, etc. Then have very clear roles and responsibilities. So who's going to do what, when, and what's the how are you going to account for each other? And then if things go wrong, how does it get escalated? If you're, are you both escalating up to the CEO, and how do the CEOs then resolve it? As I said earlier on, one of the biggest reasons that deals fail is getting executive buy-in. So as a startup, you've got to ask your partner the hard question, which is where do their bosses fit in on this? And you should be as respectfully as you can push to have a meeting with the executive, so you yourself know how well they're bought into the deal. Have reviews. So part of the process of managing a partnership is to have opportunity to get everything out on the table, sort of like independent from the day to day. So you could set quarterly or biannual business reviews where you come together with your partner and you talk about how things are going. And it gives an opportunity to kind of head problems off before they happen too early. As you scale your company, you then, you want to think about how partnerships go from being a tactic that's helping you in the moment to being part of your long-term strategy. And so for that, you may hire a head of partnerships, a partnership, director, and that he or she would be in charge of defining the process, the strategy for partnerships, and the evaluation criteria. So companies that are really good at scaling through partnerships are very disciplined about the partners that they want and the partners that they're not going to say no to, because that's actually the hardest thing to do. Is there are plenty of companies, once you're successful, there are plenty of companies that are going to want to be, you know, in business with you, but not all of them actually are right for you, and the wrong one can take up a lot of time and aggravation. Okay, so I'm just going to leave you with one thought, and this is my favorite proverb. I think it's sort of part of how I run my companies, which is the notion, which is, and it's an African proverb. So some guy on the savannah said it, you know, probably hundreds of years ago, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think that's why if you have that attitude in partnerships, you are more likely to be successful. So with that, I'll leave it open for Q&A.